was 3:15 in the morning, always 3:15. The car wouldn't start, the children were screaming, and I could feel that thing behind me. Kathy was holding the crucifix, but it was too hot to touch. That's the voice of George Lutz, recorded in 1976. A desperate man trying to explain the unexplainable, trying to make people understand why he and his family fled from their dream home after only 28 days. 28 days that changed their lives forever. But to truly understand what happened to the Lutzes, to comprehend the terror that made them abandon everything and flee in the middle of a winter night, without shoes, without coats, we need to go back a bit, 1 year before, to another family, to another tragedy, to the beginning of everything. November 13th, 1974, 3:15 in the morning, same time, always the same time. Ocean Avenue, 112, Amityville, Long Island, New York, a 3-story Dutch colonial house. Beautiful on the outside with those characteristic windows that look like eyes watching the street. On the inside, well, let's start with who lived there. Ronald DeFeo Jr., 43 years old, owner of a successful Buick dealership, family man, the neighbors said. Louise DeFeo, 42 years old, devoted housewife, practicing Catholics, went to Mass every Sunday. 4 children completed the perfect portrait of the American family of the 70s. But there's always 2 sides to every story, right? I mean, Ronald Sr. was abusive. The neighbors confirmed that later when it was already too late. Louise drank, hidden, but she drank. Vodka in the morning orange juice, gin in the afternoon tea. And the eldest son? The voices started when I was 17. First they were whispers, then they got louder. That's the voice of Ronald DeFeo Jr., recorded during his trial in 1975. Butch, as he was known to friends. 23 years old in 1974. Drug problems since he was 14. Heroin, LSD, amphetamines, whatever came along. His father, trying to help, or maybe trying to keep up appearances, gave him a job at the dealership, but money in the hands of an addict. 2 weeks before the murders, Butch and his father fought. Ugly fight. The kind of fight that neighbors hear and pretend they didn't. Screaming. Furniture breaking. At one point, the father pointed a gun at his son. The son went to get his own gun, pointed back. Louise got in the middle, screaming, crying. Dawn, the 18-year-old sister, was yelling from the top of the stairs. The 2 younger boys hid in their room. Allison, 13 years old, called the police but hung up before saying anything. Normal in that house, the neighbor said later. Fights like that were normal. Yeah, normal until it wasn't anymore. 3 in the morning, November 13th, 1974. The house was silent, finally silent. Ronald Sr. and Louise were sleeping in the master bedroom on the 2nd floor, the big room overlooking the avenue. Dawn was sleeping in the room next door, the floral wallpaper she had chosen herself. The 2 boys, Mark, 11 years old, and John, 9, shared a room in the back. Allison, 13 years old, had the privilege of her own room, small but cozy. Butch was awake, in the basement. I don't remember picking up the rifle. It was in my hand. The voice said, "Now." Just that. Now. A Marlin .35 caliber rifle. 6 people in the house besides him. 6 bullets in the gun. The macabre math was already done. 3:15. He went up the stairs. Slowly. Each step of the old wooden staircase creaked under his weight, but no one woke up. Or did they wake up and couldn't move? That's one of the mysteries that still has no explanation. First, the parents. Butch opened the master bedroom door, entered. His parents were lying face down, both of them, as if they knew what was coming, as if they were waiting. 2 shots, 1 each, in the back. The blood immediately began to soak the mattress. In 20 years on the force, I've never seen anything like it. All face down, all of them, as if they had been positioned. But the coroner swore they died in that position. Detective John Sherville, lead investigator on the case, in an interview given in 1985, and he had reason to be perplexed. Dawn was next, 18 years old. She was getting married in December. The wedding dress was already bought, hanging in the closet. 1 shot, same position, face down, hands at her sides, face turned to the side. Then the boys. Mark first, John next. Same thing, same pattern. Face down, hands at their sides. No sign of struggle, no sign that they tried to flee or defend themselves. Allison was the last, 13 years old. They say she was awake, that she saw him enter. Investigators found evidence that she had moved in bed before assuming the same position as the others, face down, waiting. But she didn't scream. She didn't run. She just turned face down and waited. 6 shots, .35 caliber, loud as hell. The sound of a rifle of that caliber in an enclosed environment, in the silence of the early morning, should have woken the entire neighborhood, but no neighbor heard anything. Absolutely nothing. 6:30 in the evening, same day. Henry's Bar, a local dive where Butch was a regular. He runs in, screaming, desperate. He was, seemed in real panic, screaming, "Someone killed my family, I need help." We thought it was a joke, that he was high again, but Bobby Kelski, Butch's friend, recalling that moment. A group of men from the bar went back with him to the house. When they entered, the smell, blood has a smell, iron, sweet and metallic at the same time. And when blood has been sitting for hours and the smell changes, gets denser, more present. The police arrived in minutes. What they found made no sense. It doesn't to this day. First thing, all dead for at least 8 hours. Rigor mortis confirmed it. Second, all face down, like I said. Third, the beds. The beds weren't messed up. Sheets perfectly smooth around the bodies, as if they hadn't struggled. Fourth, no sign of drugs in any of the victims' blood. Nothing to explain why they didn't flee, didn't scream, didn't react. Detective Chervell again. And he hadn't even mentioned the most bizarre part yet. The family dog. Shaggy. A large German shepherd. Territorial. The kind of dog that barked if a leaf fell in the yard. Was in the kennel in the backyard. Alive. Not a scratch. And according to all the neighbors interviewed, the dog that barked at everything stayed completely silent that night. Didn't make a sound. Butch was arrested the next day. He changed his story about 5 times in the first interrogations. First said it was the mafia, revenge for drug debts. Then a masked man who broke into the house. Then said it had been Louis Fellini, a friend. But always, in all versions, he insisted he wasn't alone, that someone or something had helped him, or forced him. The voices told me to do it. They said my family was planning to kill me, that I had to act first. But I think the voices were lying. December 1975. The house sat empty for over a year. The price plummeted from $100,000 to $80,000, then to $60,000. Nobody wanted to live in a house where 6 people were murdered, until for $40,000, a real steal for a property that size. It was perfect, big, beautiful, in a good neighborhood. $40,000 was robbery. Kathy thought the price was strange, but we needed space for her 3 kids. I had just become their stepfather, I wanted to give them a good home. George Lutz, 28 years old, ex-Marine, owner of a small surveying company, agnostic, skeptical, down to earth, the kind of guy who laughs at ghost stories. Kathy, 30 years old, non-practicing Catholic, divorced, 3 children from her previous marriage, Daniel, 9 years old, Christopher, 7, and little Melissa, 5. December 18th, 1975, moving day. As soon as we entered, I can't explain it. The air was heavy, dense, like breathing through a wet cloth. The children didn't want to go up the stairs at first. Melissa started crying out of nowhere, but I thought it was the move, Kids are like that. Kathy Lutz in an interview given in 1977, and she was right to think that. Moves are stressful for children, but it wasn't just that. It wasn't just the move. First night. For practicality and perhaps out of a strange sense of defiance, George and Kathy decided to sleep in the master bedroom, the same room where Ronald and Louise DeFeo were killed 13 months earlier. They knew this. The real estate agent had been honest about the house's history. George thought it was nonsense to care about that. After all, people die in houses all the time. Old houses have seen many deaths. I woke up at 3:15. Exactly. I looked at the digital clock beside the bed. 3, 1, 5. The red numbers glowing in the dark. Kathy was awake too, lying beside me, rigid, staring at the ceiling. I asked quietly, "You hearing that?" She said, "Footsteps, in the hallway." But when I opened the door, nothing. Empty hallway. Day 2. Kathy, even though she wasn't particularly religious, felt the house needed a blessing. She called Father Ralph Mancuso, a family friend for years, a man who had baptized her children, someone she trusted. I started on the 2nd floor, went from room to room with the holy water. When I entered the room that would be used as a sewing room, the air turned cold. December in New York is cold, but this was different, unnatural. I could see my breath. I started praying in Latin, and then Father Mancuso in a recording made in 1976. His voice still trembled when recalling. Flies, hundreds of them, coming out of nowhere. In December, the windows were closed, sealed against the cold. Where did they come from? Buzzing, surrounding me. And then I heard the voice. Male, deep, full of anger. Get out! Just that. Get out! I left that room. Didn't even finish the blessing. I couldn't. Mancuso didn't tell the Lutzes immediately. He thought maybe he had imagined it, that the stress of pastoral work was affecting his perception. But on the way back to the parish, the car started failing, the engine sputtering. Suddenly the hood popped open by itself, on the highway. I almost hit a pole. When I finally managed to stop and got home, my hands, there were blisters, like burns, exactly where I had held the holy water flask. He tried to call to warn the Lutzes, multiple times. Every time I dialed their number, static, just static, a loud, painful hiss. Other numbers worked perfectly, just theirs didn't. It was as if something didn't want me to make contact. The first days in the house were marked by inconveniences that could be rationally explained. The garage door that opened by itself during the night. George would check it, close it carefully, test the lock. In the morning, there it was open again. Maybe the mechanism was faulty. The fireplace. I became obsessed with that damn fireplace. I couldn't stay away. I fed the fire constantly. Woke up in the middle of the night to add more wood. Spent fortunes on firewood those first weeks. But it never really warmed up. The house was always cold. Always. George Lutz. And there were more things. Small at first, the smell. Cheap perfume. Too sweet. Nauseating. In the master bedroom. Only I could smell it. I'd open the windows, let the freezing December wind in. But when I closed them, there it was again. George couldn't smell anything. But I knew. It was her perfume. Mrs. DeFeos. As if she was still there, getting ready at her vanity. Kathy Lutz. The perfume was just the beginning. Day 5 in the house. Christopher and Daniel, the 2 boys, started complaining during breakfast. They said their beds levitated during the night. Floated. George thought it was a nightmare. Child's imagination. Kathy thought they were making up stories for attention, still adapting to the new house and new stepfather. Until I went to check. 2 in the morning. The boys had woken up screaming again. I went up the stairs, irritated, ready to scold them. When I opened the bedroom door and turned on the light, both beds were floating, about a foot off the ground. The boys lying in them, paralyzed with fear, eyes wide. For a second, maybe 2, we all just froze there. Me looking at the beds in the air, them looking at me. Then suddenly, bang, the beds fell. The noise woke up the whole house. George had never believed in anything supernatural, but it's hard to maintain skepticism when you see 2 beds with children floating in the air. I didn't tell Kathy right away. Made up an excuse about the beds being broken, that the frame had given way. But she saw my face. She knew something was wrong, very wrong. Melissa, the youngest, 5 years old, started developing peculiar behavior. She would talk to herself in her room for long periods. Normal for the age, imaginary friend, every child goes through this phase. But the content of the conversations, I asked who she was talking to. She looked at me with those innocent little eyes and said, "With Jody." I asked who Jody was. She pointed to the second-floor window and said, "The pig girl. She has red eyes and lives in the window." Kathy tried to stay calm. Children say strange things. But George went to investigate. Outside Melissa's bedroom window on the sill there were marks, footprints, but not human footprints. They were large, larger than an adult man's, and cloven, like hooves. But we were on the second floor. What could climb up there and leave hoof marks? George didn't tell Kathy about the footprints. A pattern was beginning to establish itself in the house, each one keeping their particular terrors, trying to protect the others, trying to maintain sanity. That night I kept watch. I positioned myself so I could see Melissa's window from outside. 3:15, always 3:15 in the morning. I saw the eyes, red, glowing, the size of footballs, floating outside the second-floor window. When I grabbed the flashlight and pointed it, they vanished instantly. But I saw them, I know I saw them. Melissa, now an adult, still remembers Jody. It wasn't imagination. I remember clearly. Jody told me things about the family that lived in the house before. Said they were still there, sleeping in the walls, but that they would wake up soon. That they always woke up when there were new people in the house. Second week in the house, the changes in George started becoming evident. A man who had always been meticulous about his appearance, ex-military who maintained discipline even in civilian life, began to deteriorate. He stopped shaving, stopped bathing regularly, stopped going to work, leaving the business in his partner's hands. He wasn't himself anymore. The smell, sorry to say this, but it's important. He stank, sour sweat, dirty clothes, and his face was changing, losing weight rapidly, eyes getting deeper, darker. One morning I looked at him across the breakfast table, and for a second, I swear to God, and for a second it wasn't George. It was someone else, someone younger, someone with rage in their eyes. Kathy was starting to panic, but where would they go? They had invested everything in the house, the savings, the divorce money, everything. George developed a disturbing routine. He would wake up every night at 3:15, punctually, and feel an irresistible compulsion to check the boathouse at the back of the property. I had to go. Something pulled me. It wasn't want, it was need, like breathing. Every night, 3:15, there I was, walking to the boathouse in the freezing cold, sometimes barefoot without even realizing it. One night the lock was broken, from the inside out. The wood splintered, as if something very strong had forced its way out, but there was nothing in there, nothing I could see. It was during these nightly walks that George started hearing the voice. It wasn't voices, plural, it was one voice. Male, young, full of rage, telling me to do things to my family, saying they were against me, that they were planning to betray me, that I had to act before they acted. The same thing that Ronald heard. Day 20 in the house. George, fighting against the influence he felt growing, decided to investigate the basement. There had been something wrong with the basement from the beginning, a feeling of weight, of presence. In the farthest corner, he discovered something that wasn't on the house plans. A small room, maybe 6 feet by 6 feet. The walls painted red, blood red. But the most disturbing thing, the walls seemed wet, warm to the touch, as if they had life of their own, as if they were breathing. The smell down there was unbearable, sulfur mixed with rot. In the center of the small room, on the floor, a stone cover, heavy, old, much older than the house. George, against all common sense, opened the cover. The stench that came up was indescribable. Death, decomposition, but old, very old. The hole was deep, deeper than should be possible. And down there, in the absolute darkness, movement. Something moving, something coming up. I closed the cover and ran. Never ran so much in my life. Later research revealed the terrible history of that land. Long before the house was built, long before the colonizers arrived, the Shinnecock tribe considered that place cursed. It was where they took the dead who couldn't be buried normally, the murderers, the insane, the possessed, and they performed rituals to keep them trapped. In 1692, a man named John Ketchum built a cabin on that exact spot. Ketchum had been expelled from Salem accused of witchcraft. He lived as a hermit for years, until he was found dead under mysterious circumstances. The few records from the time mention that he performed profane practices, and that the local Indians avoided the area. The Shinnecock considered that place a weak point between worlds, a place where the dead could return if the right rituals were performed, or if enough blood was spilled. When the colonizers built there, ignoring the warnings, well, you can imagine what was released. Dr. Hans Holzer, historian and paranormal researcher, studied the case in 1977. His conclusions were disturbing. December 26th, 8 days before the escape, the events in the house reached a crescendo of horror. I woke up with intense pain, in my chest, on my back. When I turned on the light and opened my nightgown, marks, deep scratches, like claws, forming a pattern. George had similar marks on his back, deep enough to bleed. Neither of us did that. We slept holding each other all night, waking up together with the pain. The children couldn't sleep anymore. Every night at 3:15, they would start screaming in unison. They said someone was in the room, a young man with a hole in his head. Daniel, the oldest, described in detail. Long dark hair, sunken eyes, a bullet wound in the temple. He described Ronald DeFeo Jr. perfectly, but Daniel had never seen a picture of him. We had been careful not to expose the children to the morbid details of the crime. December 27th, George made a discovery in the attic that would change everything. An old shoebox, hidden under the thermal insulation. Inside, photos. The DeFeo family. Vacations, birthdays, Christmas. Happy family, smiling. But in all the photos, all the faces had been carefully torn out, removed. Except one. In all the photos, Ronald Jr.'s face was intact. And on the back of one of them, written in what appeared to be dried blood, "The house needs blood. The house always needs blood. Feed it, or it will feed on you." George understood in that moment. The house wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. The house was the evil. A living entity that fed on violence, on blood, on death, that manipulated the residents, whispering, influencing, until it made Ronald kill his family. Now it wanted me to repeat the pattern. I could feel the mental pressure increasing, the voices getting louder, more insistent. "Kill them," they said. "It's the only way to have peace. Ronald has peace. Ronald is free now." December 28th. Kathy woke up in the middle of the night with a vision that would make her scream. The bedroom wall was bleeding, not a figure of speech. Blood, running in thick streams. The crucifix on the wall, a wedding gift from her mother, started spinning, slowly at first, then faster, until it was upside down. And then, it caught fire. Green flames. Unnatural. George was no longer himself. The moments of lucidity were increasingly rare. I fought against it, against the voice, but I was losing. Every day it became harder to remember who I was, why I was there. I looked at Kathy and the children and felt rage. A rage that wasn't mine. I saw them as enemies, as threats that needed to be eliminated. December 30th. Father Mancuso finally made contact. Not by phone. Those remained impossible. He drove to the house personally. I didn't even get out of the car. As soon as I entered the property, I felt it. The evil. Pure. Concentrated. The windows of the house seemed to watch me. I could hear voices. Multiple voices laughing. I screamed through the car window. "Get out of there, get out while you can," and reversed. I fled. May God forgive me, but I fled. January 1st, 1976. New Year. While the rest of Amityville celebrated, the house on Ocean Avenue prepared its final act. The manifestations became constant. Doors slamming, windows exploding, the temperature dropping so much we could see our breath even with the heater on maximum. And the worst, we started seeing them, the DeFeos, standing in the corners, watching, waiting. Kathy's accounts of these last days are fragmented, confused. The constant terror affected her ability to form coherent memories. George disappeared for hours. I found him in the basement, standing in front of that red room, talking to himself. Or no, talking to someone I couldn't see, agreeing, nodding his head. When I called him, he turned and the face wasn't his. It was younger. It was Ronald DeFeo. January 13th, 1976. 28th day in the house. The final day. The whole house vibrated, like a giant heart beating. The walls pulsed. From the basement came a sound, chanting, multiple voices singing in a language that wasn't human. The children were in a catatonic state, holding each other in Kathy's room. George went down to the basement for the last time. The red room was open, the well cover removed, and from it, shadows were rising, forms that weren't solid but had substance. They surrounded me, whispered, showed me things. The house is past. Everyone who died there, not just the DeFeos. Others, many others. Decades of death, centuries of blood, and all still there, trapped, hungry. The main voice, the one George identified as male and young, became clearer than ever. "Do it," it said. "Kill them, like I killed mine. It's the only way to free us, to free yourself. The house needs blood, always needed it, always will need it. If you don't give what it wants, it will take it anyway." George went up the stairs, got the axe he used to chop wood. His movements were mechanical, automatic. It was no longer him in control. I went up the stairs. I could hear Kathy praying in the bedroom with the children. Part of me screamed, fought, but it was like being trapped inside my own body, watching. When I got to the bedroom door, I raised the axe. Kathy was prepared. She had felt the final change in George. She held a crucifix in one hand and a flask of holy water in the other. I threw the holy water on him, on what had been my husband. He screamed as if he had been burned. For a moment, just a moment, I saw the real George in his eyes, fighting, asking me for help. What happened next was chaotic. The house reacted violently to the interference. The walls started bleeding. Literally, blood running from the ceiling, rising from the floor. The air became so cold it hurt to breathe, and the screams came from everywhere, from the walls, from the floor, from the air, screams of rage, of hunger. George dropped the axe. The moment of lucidity caused by the holy water was enough. I looked in the hallway mirror and saw. It wasn't my reflection. It was Ronald DeFeo Jr. staring at me, smiling. I understood that if we didn't leave that moment, we would repeat the tragedy. The house would have its blood one way or another. 3:15 in the morning. Always 3:15. George yelled to Kathy, "Get the kids. Now! Don't look back! Run!" They ran, barefoot, without coats, in the middle of New York winter. The temperature outside was below freezing, but the cold outside was preferable to the horror inside the house. The car wouldn't start. I turned the key, and nothing. The house didn't want to let us go. I could feel the pressure, the rage. The house windows all exploded at once, glass raining on the car, the voices screaming. Not one or two, dozens, maybe hundreds. George desperately tried to start the car. Kathy prayed. The children cried. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity but was probably 2 or 3 minutes, the engine started. I floored the accelerator, didn't even look back. But Kathy looked. In the rearview mirror, she saw 6 figures standing in the second-floor windows. Standing, watching. The DeFeo family, waiting for the next residents. The Lutzes never returned to the house. They left everything behind. Clothes, furniture, memories. They sent a moving company to get the essentials weeks later. The workers stayed less than 20 minutes in the house. They said they heard voices telling them to leave, that the boxes moved by themselves, that there was always someone watching even when they were alone. Ed and Lorraine Warren, the famous paranormal investigators, visited the house in March 1976. What we found in that house. In 40 years investigating the paranormal, I had never felt such concentrated evil. It wasn't just the DeFeo family trapped there. It was something much older. The house is a portal, a weak point between dimensions, and every violent death that happens there strengthens that connection, feeds what's on the other side. Ed Warren in an interview. Lorraine, who was a medium, refused to go to the second floor. There was something in the master bedroom, something that fed on fear and violence. I saw Ronald DeFeo Jr., yes, but he was just another victim. The real evil used him, as it tried to use George Lutz, as it will try to use others. The house at 112 Ocean Avenue was sold and resold multiple times in the following decades. No family lasted more than a year until 1987, when the then owners, tired of the negative attention, managed to officially change the house number from 112 to 108, as if changing the number could change the nature of the place. The reports continued, though more discreet. Families who didn't want publicity, who left quietly in the middle of the night, who invented excuses for the sudden move. But the pattern was always the same. A few months of small disturbances, escalation of activity, and then, always around 28 days, something would happen that made them flee. Ronald DeFeo Jr. spent the rest of his life in prison. He died in 2021, at 69 years old. Until the end, he maintained contradictory versions about that night. Sometimes he said he acted alone. Sometimes he insisted on the voices. But in his later years, when he had nothing left to lose, his story became more consistent. The house chose me, like it chose others before me, like it will choose others after. It's not about ghosts. It's about the place itself. Something was done there, a long time ago. Something that opened a door that can't be closed, only fed with blood, with death, with fear. In his last recorded statement in 2020, a year before he died, Ronald said something that would chill anyone. Sometimes at 3:15 in the morning I still hear it, even here in the cell, the voice, saying I did good, that the house is satisfied, for now, but the hunger always comes back. Always. The Lutzes were lucky. They fled in time. Not everyone manages to. The house is patient. It can wait. There's always someone looking for a bargain. There's always someone who doesn't believe the stories. The house is still there. 108 Ocean Avenue now. Renovated, modernized, beautiful on the outside. Sold in 2024 for $1,200,000. The new owners didn't want to give an interview. Understandable. Who wants to admit they spent over $1 million on a house with that history? But the neighbors noticed things. They seem tired, always tired. They arrived full of energy, big renovation plans. Now they barely leave, and sometimes in the early morning, you can still hear it. Doors slamming, voices, always around 3:15. An anonymous neighbor, lives on the street for 40 years, saw the DeFeos, saw the Lutzes flee, saw all the families that came after. It's always the same. In the beginning, they laugh at the stories, say it's superstition, that the past is past. But the house doesn't forget. The house doesn't forgive. The house waits. You who are listening to this now, have you checked the time? A lot of people have the habit of waking up at 3:15 in the morning for no apparent reason. They say it's the devil's hour, the moment when the veil between worlds is thinnest, when influences from the other side are strongest. But it could just be coincidence. It could be that your brain has been programmed by stories like this. It could mean nothing. Or it could be that you live in a house with history, a house where bad things happened, where the past doesn't want to stay buried, where sometimes you feel like you're not alone, even when you are, where doors open by themselves, where you hear footsteps upstairs when there's no one there. If this sounds familiar, check your house's history. Seriously, check who lived there before, what happened there, because some houses remember, and what they remember isn't always good. The house on Ocean Avenue in Amityville is the most famous case, but it's not the only one. Far from it. In every city, in every neighborhood, there's a house like that. A house that people avoid. A house that can't keep residents. A house with a price too good to be true. Sometimes it's just a bad reputation. Exaggerated stories. Fertile imagination. But sometimes the stories are true. Sometimes the house is waiting, hungry, patient, for you. It's 3:15 in the morning somewhere right now. It's always 3:15 somewhere. And in some house, in some city, someone is waking up without knowing why, hearing sounds that shouldn't be there, feeling presences they can't explain. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's your house. Maybe it's too late to run. The Amityville case teaches us an important lesson. When a house tries to tell you its story through blood on the walls, voices in the dark, presences that shouldn't exist, it's better to listen. It's better to leave. While you still can, because not everyone manages to. Ronald DeFeo Jr. couldn't. His family couldn't. The Lutzes barely did. And the house is still there, waiting, always waiting.